It happens every single year on the anniversary of the accident. It rides again as a warning to others, plunging into the gap, shrieking like a lost soul! Or at least that's the story you will have heard if you've lived on Sodor before. Many Sudrians consider Halloween their favorite holiday. I like to think that it's only because of the Fat Controller's fireworks displays. In fact, even the engines try to participate in the holiday's activities, so it's no surprise that trick-or-treaters enjoy hanging around the island's heritage railways. In fact, many of the island's engines even take trick-or-treaters with the help of their crew. And one year in particular, James had a fiendish idea to snatch some extra candy for himself. When some kids approached the sheds at Tidmouth and announced their presence, James didn't answer, despite the fact that he was very much home. As the kids were about to leave, though, the shed doors threw open, revealing a truly chilling sight. It was a Yorkshire Class 28 engine, much like James, except the whole engine was jet black, with no discernible features. "The ghost train is real!" one of the children shouted. They took off running into the night, leaving their candy behind. But as they ran off, the engine dusted itself off to reveal itself as James. "They fall for it every single bleeding year," James said to himself. James had been covering himself in coal powder to hide his identity and pass himself off as a ghost, and he had successfully scared away and stolen the candy of 10 groups of children thus far. By then, the children had managed to find a hiding spot in another shed on the other side of the station. "That was terrifying," one of them said. Percy, who happened to be resting in that shed, overheard the kids. "What was so scary?" Percy asked. The kids explained their story to him, and Percy became cross. "That sounds an awful lot like a trick James tried last year," he said. "Anyone who would try to steal kids' candy on Halloween is more of a monster than any actual monsters. I'll help you kids get your candy back." They climbed aboard Percy, and he carried them in the direction of James's shed with a plan. The number of trick-or-treaters passing through had dwindled, and James had gotten tired and fallen asleep. But as he rested, one of the children snuck into the shed, carrying out a part of Percy's payback plan. The child started mixing superglue into the bags of coal dust James had been using to disguise himself, and snuck back out. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door which woke James up. James smirked. "Someone for me to scare," he grinned. The shed doors burst open, but James dropped the act immediately as he saw it was a police officer standing there. "3 children have been reported missing in the area," the cop said. "We have reason to suspect the culprit is a black Yorkshire Class 28. James attempted to shake off the coal dust, but it wouldn't come off for the life of him. "Just as I suspected," the officer said. "You're headed for the scrapyard." James panicked and burst out of the shed. "It's just me, James!" he shouted. He ran into Gordon and frantically shouted at him. "You've got to help me!" he shouted. "People think I'm a ghost!" But Gordon wasn't to be much help. "My God, it's the ghost train that Percy told me about," Gordon huffed. "If you think you can outmuscle a Gresley A3, come at me!" "No, Gordon!" James shouted as he ran for it. In that moment, he ran into Edward, who had the same reaction. "It's the ghost train!" Edward shouted. "Get him!" It's me, James! James shouted, but it did him no good.
Let's wall him up in the tunnel!
Henry shouted. James raced across the Vickerstown Bridge and onto the British mainland. He'd never been more afraid of anything in his life. He rocketed through the station at Barrow in Furness, not realizing he was headed straight for the buffers! The water tower spilled its contents all over James, cleaning away the coal dust. But James's troubles were only beginning as he got a good look at where he had crashed. The Barrow in Furness scrapyard. James could hear the sound of the scrapyard crane beginning to fire up. He knew that even the most useful engines eventually ended up here, even the preserved ones on heritage railways such as him. But he was too young. More than a century old, of course, but he'd never been told that his work was getting rusty. He gulped as the giant magnet swung over top of him and grabbed him. Is this how James the Splendid Engine meets his end, he thought? James, the very last of the Yorkshire Class 28 engines, found himself drawing nearer and nearer to the smelter. If those kids are within earshot, James said out loud, I'm so sorry for everything. If only they were here, I'd get them back all of their candy with interest. I'd get them more candy than they'd ever had in every Halloween since the dawn of man! Suddenly, the crane stopped moving. 3 familiar faces came out of hiding. If we have the guy in the crane let you go, will you make good on the promise you just made? One of them asked. James sighed and relented. I will! Just get me down from here! He demanded. And so, per his request, they got him down from there. The next day, James was repaired and sent back onto the line. In a stroke of luck, the Fat Controller heard nothing about it, but he was quite confused as to why James was insisting on delivering trucks full of candy to the island's residential areas for the next few weeks. In short, James learned the time-old lesson that if you're naughty on Halloween, your nightmares just might come true.